The morning sun poured over Cedar Grove like it always did. Too bright, too perfect, the kind of light that made every identical two-story colonial look like it had been photoshopped into reality. But at 6:17 a.m., my phone didn't buzz with the usual neighbor asking if I'd seen their escaped labradoodle. No, it lit up with Karen Whitaker's name, HOA President, vibrating so hard it nearly walked itself off the nightstand. I didn't even need coffee. My spine did that preemptive tighten, the one you get right before the thing you quietly kept alive for 7 years starts bleeding out in public. See, I wasn't supposed to be on that call. I had already been transitioned out, as Karen put it in the email she'd sent at midnight, like a coward who couldn't wait for daylight. The new regime had arrived 6 weeks earlier when she'd won the board election by promising streamlined community excellence and modern transparency. Translation: she hated that I knew where every skeleton in the covenant closet was buried. I had built the entire digital compliance system from scratch. Dues tracking, violation logs, architectural review approvals, vendor payment schedules, even the automated alerts that kept the city inspectors from slapping the whole neighborhood with code violations. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't some cloud app with emojis. But it worked. Every single assessment collected on time. Every fine calculated to the penny. Every contractor paid before the pool turned green or the common area landscaping went feral. I ran it like a nervous parent raising a gifted kid in a war zone. Triple backups, logic gates tighter than Karen's Botox budget, firewalled so no one could accidentally delete a decade of precedent. Nobody noticed me. I liked it that way. My office was the spare bedroom between the server rack and the filing cabinets that smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. I didn't need a window. I had logs. Logs don't gossip. They don't politic. They just quietly tell you who owes 3 years of late fees, whose fence is 0.3 inches over the approved height, and which board member tried to override a compliance lock to let her cousin install a 6-foot pink flamingo display. I caught that one before it hit the minutes. Saved the association $18,000 in potential city fines. None of it made the glossy quarterly newsletter Karen loved to pose in. But none of that mattered when the new regime rolled in. They wanted sleek. I was legacy. In HOA speak, that means disposable. They gave me 30 minutes notice at the emergency board meeting. No thank you plaque, no severance cookies, not even a proper vote. Just Karen smiling that plastic smile while her nephew Brandon, fresh out of some online community leadership certificate program, leaned back in the ergonomic chair he'd ordered on the association's dime. We're moving to cloud-based AI optimization, Karen announced, voice syrupy. No more black box processes. Brandon's going to handle the transformation. Real-time dashboards, resident app integration, the works. My mouth tasted like drywall dust. Brandon gave me the look people reserve for dusty antiques. Who still uses scripts and batch files anyway? He said, smirking at my laptop like he expected it to start flickering in green DOS. I mean, what is this? 1998. I didn't answer. Just tapped enter on the quarterly compliance audit that had more embedded logic than his entire LinkedIn profile. Every covenant violation, every deferred maintenance fee, every union contractor clause populated error-free. He leaned over my desk. You've got all this hard-coded. Scripted, I corrected softly. Hard-coded would mean you can't change it without breaking everything. This updates dynamically. You just have to know where to look. Brandon nodded slowly, clearly understanding nothing. Right. Well, that's why we're bringing in modular cloud systems. No more tribal knowledge. We're democratizing data. He said it like he'd just cured cancer. Karen clapped me on the shoulder like we were old golf buddies. Marcus, we've appreciated all your volunteer hours, but we need to modernize. Brandon's taking it from here. Just like that. No transition plan, no knowledge transfer, no documentation request. I was an expired coupon. Once useful, now embarrassing to acknowledge. My hands didn't shake. I'd had stronger reactions to weak neighborhood coffee. You got until the next assessment cycle, I said, voice flat. After that, you'll notice. They laughed. Brandon actually laughed out loud. I hope your scripts are better than your threats, dude. I log out. one hand still resting on the keyboard. Clicked open a folder labeled Safe Folders Forward. Inside sat a harmless-looking subroutine. Wouldn't execute unless the main batch runner missed a specific initialization flag, one I triggered manually once a month for testing. Then I turned to the the board assistant, holding my cardboard box by the door. Poor kid looked like he was being forced to fire a golden retriever. As I walked past the community center, I heard Brandon say, "It's wild how long people like that coast in these volunteer roles. Legacy guys like old routers nobody wants to unplug." Maybe he was right. I wasn't flashy. I didn't do PowerPoints with gradient slides or use words like synergistic resident experience unironically. But here's what I did have: a system held together by logic, not vibes. And now that system was about to be in the hands of a woman who thought optimizing meant replacing 7 years of tested code with a $9.99 phone app and her nephew's TikTok-inspired Excel macros. God help Cedar Grove. The badge drop was silent. No dramatic security escort, just a tiny clink of plastic on the community center counter like I was returning a library book instead of 7 years of blood, sweat, and covenant compliance. The part-time manager didn't even look up. Guess they don't brief the staff on who's been single-handedly keeping the entire financial and enforcement engine from exploding. Before I left the building, I went back to my desk one last time. No one stopped me. Of course they didn't. Nobody actually knew what I did. Not even Karen. That's the beauty of being legacy. You're invisible until you're critical. By the time anyone realizes what you were holding together, the lights are already flickering. I plug in a thumb drive, not to copy anything. Everything I needed was already mirrored off-site in an encrypted sandbox they'd never find. No, this was to run one command I prepped years ago, but never used. A dormant protocol buried under 3 layers of obfuscation and labeled as a deprecated test file. They thought I was old-fashioned, so I gave them something old-fashioned. The decommission sequence didn't delete data. That would have been too obvious and probably illegal. What it did was subtler. It decoupled critical nodes from the main interface. Assessment tables, violation logic, vendor disbursement schedules, benefit reconciliation for the reserve fund. On the surface, everything still looked fine. Pretty dashboards, same buttons. But every process that mattered now required a specific rotating time-based key I generated weekly from a separate tool they'd never locate. In other words, the machine was still humming, but the steering wheel wasn't connected to the wheels anymore. The moment I walked out, Cedar Grove was already driving a car with no brakes. They just didn't know it yet. 3 days later, I got a text from old Mrs. Delgado in finance. Well, the volunteer treasurer. Screenshot of a Slack thread. Anyone know why the Q3 assessment batch didn't run? Dues didn't hit for half the street. Karen's reply was golden. Ask Brandon. Probably a permission issue. Brandon's answer. Just rerunning now, LOL. Might be a legacy trigger conflict. Legacy trigger conflict. Jesus. They had no idea they were already bleeding. Just a paper cut for now. Sure. A mid-cycle assessment missed. Whatever. Homeowners would grumble. Karen would promise a correction and blame the old system. But every line of that engine had contingencies. If one failed, others would cascade. It was layered like an onion. If onions caused HOA bankruptcies and city liens. The week ticked on. I kept quiet. At night, I'd sit in my little converted laundry closet office and flip through logs from the sandbox, watching in real time as Brandon deleted what he didn't understand. Script after script gone. He was cleaning house, trying to make it his. That's the thing about cleaning house. Sometimes you throw out the foundation. Saturday night at 9:03 p.m., my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer, but I pulled the logs. They'd triggered the first internal lock. Backup reconciliation batch had failed to execute due to an unrecognized scheduling key. No deposits would push to vendors unless the override was entered by Monday noon, which it wouldn't be because the override was mine and I was gone. The first complaints trickled in like ants to a melting ice cream. Quiet at first, then relentless. The pool contractor in Topeka equivalent didn't get reimbursed for chemicals. The landscaping crew for the common areas had taxes withheld wrong. Residents started forwarding screenshots of stub errors, blank lines, double charges. Some people billed for violations that didn't exist, while others who'd painted their front door forbidden beige got zero notice. Karen emailed the board. "We've got discrepancies. Transition hiccups. Keep calm and tell them we're optimizing the resident experience." Optimizing. God help us all. From my IKEA desk and keyboard with worn-off letters, I watched it all through the mirror instance. I didn't have live access anymore, but I didn't need it. I'd build a clone to test every variable before going live during my tenure. They never decommissioned it. Why would they? They didn't even know it existed. And that clone was screaming. One by one, batch dependencies failed their tests. Reconciliation logic buckled when reserve fund calculations looped into new values. Tax schema misfired for 3 different counties. A cascading error broke the city compliance filters for every property on Maple Lane. The resident app still looked fine, just a clean dashboard saying all systems green, but under the hood it was a garbage fire soaked in gasoline. Brandon, in his infinite certificate program wisdom, started doing what any overconfident 20-something with admin rights and zero experience does. He deleted everything that confused him. If it had an underscore and wasn't mentioned in his 6-page onboarding guide, it went into the digital wood chipper. Gone. Clean. Simple. Efficient. Until he nuked the script labeled vendor old. Old. That was the trigger word for his little deletion crusade. Except that script wasn't old. It was the patch I'd written to manage specific disbursement routing based on a 2012 city ordinance that had never been sunset. And now every maintenance payment from 3 vendors froze. Contributions misrouted, deposits delayed, and you do not mess with the guys who keep the pool chlorinated and the lawns mowed, especially not in July. The landscaping crew tried manual reentry. Didn't work. The system flagged their entries as duplicates, but wouldn't process them. You had to know the exact reconciliation override sequence to bypass the safeguard, a safeguard I'd built for people who actually understood the covenants. Meanwhile, I was filling out the last form to register my freelance LLC. I've been thinking about it for years, always putting it off for loyalty to the community. Nothing like getting fired by a Botox power tripper and replaced by her TikTok certified nephew to make you suddenly productive. Marcus Hale Compliance Consulting. Tagline: legacy doesn't mean outdated. It means it actually works. I didn't need their chaos. I had coffee. I had a whiteboard. I had a list of ex-neighbors already reaching out through back channels asking if I was consulting yet. I didn't reply. Not yet. I was waiting. By Thursday, a third of the homeowners hadn't received correct assessment statements. The treasurer was getting nasty calls. Someone on Maple Lane tweeted, "How do you miss an entire quarter's dues but still send me a violation notice for my American flag being half an inch too big?" Brandon, according to the board group chat leak, was walking around the community center saying things like, "We just need to flush the pipes." Flush the pipes. This wasn't plumbing. It was a machine built on logic, precedent, and timing. Without me, they were poking it with sticks and hoping for the best. Still, I didn't say a word, didn't post, didn't call, didn't even text my old board allies, even though I knew some of them were panicking. They learned soon enough. The next assessment deadline was Friday at 6 a.m., and nothing was aligned. Friday morning started with a scream, not literal, but close. One of those sharp, panic-tinged, all-caps emails from a regional manager. Wait, no for Mrs. Delgado at 6:04 a.m., BCC to the entire board and God knows who else. Subject line said it all. Assessments didn't land. 0. Nothing. I was still asleep, but notifications started hitting my burner email like buckshot. Not from the board. They weren't self-aware yet, but from old neighbors, ex-board members, even the guy I trained 6 years ago who now ran the security patrol. "Dude, not sure if you've heard you seeing what's going on over there. Did they break your system?" They didn't break it. They just thought they could operate it without knowing where the keys were buried. By 7 a.m., over 340 homes had received nothing. No statements, no auto debits, no nothing. The batch job had fired, but the logic layer underneath, the one that authenticated final approvals based on real-time reserve audits and vendor splits, had rejected everything. It logged the rejections. It even offered a debug suggestion in the admin console, but Brandon had already deleted the script that handled those exceptions. Result: frozen deposits, half-push statements, some people showing negative balances. One guy on Elm posted a statement showing $0 owed to yourself. It went mildly viral in the neighborhood Facebook group. Then the contractors chimed in. They were paid through a separate trigger labeled XT_dispatch_3. It depended on a reconciliation check that pulled 3 tables: validation, status, clearance. Brandon had renamed one, trying to standardize terminology. So now every vendor was flagged as unverified entity. The pool chemicals guy threatened to pull service by Monday if he didn't see a check. The landscaping crew posted a photo of their trucks idling outside the gate with a sign, "Unpaid equals unmowed." I watched it all from my home office, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said Control+Alt+Delete your Karen. The logs were beautiful in a train wreck kind of way. Elegant failure. I could have stopped it with 4 keystrokes. I didn't. Around 8:15 a.m., a city inspector tied to the county code compliance pilot program flagged the failed disbursements as a potential breach. That was the first real grenade. If the HOA can't pay for common area upkeep, it isn't just embarrassing, it's investigated. That ping went straight to the association attorney. Then the attorney went to Karen. And Karen went full Chernobyl. I got the first call at 8:42 a.m. I recognized the number, but let it go to voicemail. She didn't even say her name. Just, "Marcus, if you're seeing what's going on, please call me. We need to talk." I didn't delete it. I just let it sit there blinking red like a guilty conscience. By 9 a.m., Brandon was in the conference room with a printed stack of error logs he couldn't read. Someone leaked a picture, him sweating through his pastel polo, gesturing at a whiteboard covered in buzzwords like rebuild tree and manual sync option. The treasurer tried a manual override. That's when a real kicker landed. Check some errors. Because yes, I had thought of that too. Every manual upload had to pass a specific checksum tied to a rotating salt key. Without it, the file got flagged as tampered and locked. It was how I protected the system from internal fraud, or in this case, gross incompetence. The backup they tried to restore rejected. Timestamp mismatch. Integrity violation. The entire assessment engine was dead in the water. Meanwhile, the board was fielding hundreds of calls. A retired judge on Pine Street threatened legal action by noon if his escrow wasn't fixed. Someone in compliance warned Karen they were technically in breach of the master covenant for every homeowner who hadn't received timely billing. I heard through the very reliable neighborhood grapevine that Karen locked herself in the community center office and called my number 4 more times. I let every single one ring out. Not out of malice, out of principle. You don't replace 7 years of tested compliance logic with a phone app and nepotism. And you sure as hell don't fire the only person who knows how to stop the bleeding. By 10:30 a.m., the panic stopped being internal. That's when the association attorney walked in. I got the update from a former board member who still had me on a private signal thread. She sent one line, "He's here." He's not smiling. The attorney doesn't usually deal with day-to-day operations. He's the guy who shows up for closing statements and big lawsuits. The man once gave a seminar on covenant harmony through empathy. And now he was sitting in the boardroom dead silent as legal pulled up a screen showing a flashing dashboard of failed disbursements, lawsuit risk assessments, and a lovely little pie chart labeled unrecoverable funds. Estimated exposure, $427,000. Apparently, the attorney had warned about modernization risks last year. Nobody listened. Now it wasn't just late assessments. It was vendor liens, reserve fund mismatches, city code violations piling up because the common areas weren't being maintained. For homeowners with escrow accounts tied to mortgages, that wasn't just an inconvenience. That was foreclosure risk. The attorney laid it out without sugarcoating. If this wasn't resolved by Monday, they'd face a class action from every resident who received a misstatement plus potential city takeover of the HOA penalties alone could push into seven figures before the banks and the county got involved. Karen sat stiff, sweat blooming through her foundation like ink on paper. Her defense, tech debt. She said it loudly like it was a spell that would make accountability disappear. She blamed my system. The whole thing was archaic. It was bound to break. I inherited a mess. I'm doing my best with outdated tools. The attorney just stared at her. No expression. Then someone, nobody sure who, but I'd bet the treasurer, murmured the sentence that finally shifted the room. Marcus warned them. The sentence hit like a tuning fork. Sharp. Resonant. Unavoidable. The attorney turned from the monitor. "You what?" She nodded. He said it when he left. "You've got until the next assessment cycle." Those were his exact words. Another board member chimed in. Didn't he also set up the reserve fund sync logic? Silence. Karen tried to defend herself. Said she had restructured the workflow. But the treasurer interrupted. "You deleted the scripts. And then we told you to consult with him before pushing changes." It turned into a slow-motion car crash. Every voice layering over the last. The attorney asked about rollback capacity. There was none. Brandon had overwritten the rollback protocols with some janky app sync logic that failed checksum validation. One board member asked if they contacted me. Karen admitted, "Yes, I've been trying." The attorney looked up at that. "What's he said?" "Voicemail," Karen admitted. The room paused. The attorney folded his hands. "What's our legal exposure if this continues?" Legal didn't flinch. Covenant violations, reserve mismanagement, breach of contract with vendors, potential class action risk if framed as deliberate negligence. And then came the most important question of the day. The attorney turned to the room. "Can we fix this without Marcus?" The answer was short. Not before the Monday deadline. Nobody said a word after that. I wasn't there, but I could feel the shift from 3 zip codes away. For 7 years, I was the guy they ignored. They didn't understand the code. They didn't bother to document. Now I was the only one who could make the bleeding stop. The email ended at 11:52 a.m. Sharp. Subject line, "Can we talk?" No greeting, no name, no signature, just those 4 words from the association attorney himself. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made lunch. A real one. Grilled cheese cut diagonally. Tomato soup on the side. Sat on the porch with my mutt watching him pretend to scare squirrels. Every few minutes I glanced at my phone. New messages came in. Signal group buzzing with rumors. Neighborhood Facebook DMs from residents sniffing blood in the water. A few. "Hey, I know it's crazy, but do you still do consulting?" I didn't respond to any of them. Around 6:03 p.m., the knock came. Not a call, not another email, a knock. I knew it wasn't Brandon. He wouldn't know my address unless he'd stalked the footer of my old assessment forms. And Karen? Please. That woman didn't walk farther than the community sitter espresso machine if she could delegate it. When I opened the door, it was neither of them. It was the association attorney wearing an unbuttoned collar, no tie, holding a manila folder and a paper coffee cup like peace offerings. He didn't ask to come in, just said, "I thought this would be easier in person." I nodded once and stepped aside. He walked into my modest living room like he was entering a foreign country, looked around at the books, the cracked leather chair, the ancient desktop humming in the corner. "I always imagined you had some kind of control center," he said. I gestured toward the rig. "That's it. Nothing fancy. Just something that works." He sat carefully like he expected the chair to bite, opened the manila folder. Inside were printed screenshots of error logs, emails from vendors, and one sticky note that said "Reserve Calc Logic" circled in red ink. "We didn't understand what you built," he said. That was the moment I knew I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I wouldn't need to beg or gloat or even smile. The silence between us said enough. 7 years of being ignored, undervolunteered, talked over, sidelined in favor of shinier apps and trendier board members. undone by a single sentence from a man who finally realized he didn't even know what he didn't know. He set the folder down like a confession. "We thought it was just dues and fines," he said quietly. "We thought if it ran, it didn't matter how." "It mattered," I said. "It always mattered." He nodded once, then leaned forward. "We need your help." Not a demand, not a guilt trip. A genuine, hesitant request from a man who realized the roof was gone and the storm was overhead. I didn't answer right away. Just walked to my desk and pulled up the mirrored logs. Watched the red flags blink like Christmas lights in hell. Saw a new one. City compliance lockout on the common area maintenance. That alone could trigger a county takeover. When I turned back, the attorney hadn't moved. Just sat there watching me. "I'm not asking you to come back full time," he said. "I just need the bleeding to stop." I nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. The weight of 7 years, the humiliation of being discarded, the cold satisfaction of being needed, not wanted but needed, settled into place. "I'll think about it," I said, and I meant it. Not because I didn't know what I'd do, but because he needed to know that I was the one choosing. They sent the contract the next morning. Not through the board, not through Karen, through the attorney's personal assistant. Marked confidential, urgent, signed today. I didn't sign it right away. I read every word. It was clean, almost reverent, like they were afraid if they inserted too many clauses I'd vanish again. My favorite part was buried on page 4 under the innocuous title, Consulting Scope and Boundaries. No internal supervision. No scheduled board meetings. No performance evaluations. Access to all systems required for delivery. Retainer clause. 30-day minimum billing per month regardless of hours. Hourly rate 4 times my original volunteer stipend. That's right, 4 times per hour for the same work they used to ignore. I added one thing in red pen before signing. Emergency override access reinstated. No secondary approval required. They agreed immediately. No red lines, no questions, just a quiet understood in the follow-up email from the attorney. When I logged back into the system, my official contractor profile freshly minted, I saw the mess in its raw, unfiltered glory. It was worse than I thought. So much worse. At some point, Brandon had tried to reset the logic tables and created a recursive loop that was canceling out valid entries after verifying them. It was like watching a vending machine refund your money and still eat the candy. It took 2 hours to patch the critical threads. Another 4 to rewrite the reserve fund reconciliation logic from scratch. That was Friday. By Saturday, the deposits were flowing. By Sunday, the assessment statements started realigning. By Monday, the vendors were quiet. And by Tuesday, Brandon was gone. No announcement, no farewell charcuterie board, just radio silence, his Slack account deactivated, his name scrubbed from the org chart like a typo. Karen followed the next day. Technically, she took indefinite leave for personal health reasons, but I heard from the attorney that the board asked her to step aside until they could determine internal vulnerabilities, which is HOA speak for, you were the vulnerability. I didn't gloat. Didn't dance on graves. I didn't even reply when Karen's best friend, who I hadn't spoken to since the 2022 holiday potluck, sent me a message that just said, "Guess the app didn't save her, huh?" Instead, I did what I always did. Logged in early, ran the checks, watched the system breathe again. At one point, the treasurer pinged me on Slack. Assessments feel calmer now. Cleaner. Then she added, "Glad you're back, even if it's not full-time." I just replied with a thumbs-up emoji because this wasn't about coming back. It was about being seen for the first time, not as a fallback plan, but as a cornerstone. And this time I held the pen. This time they knew better. The logs rolled in like rainfall on glass. Steady. Predictable. Clean. No red flags, no stack errors, no unbalanced records, no contribution mismatches, no compliance audits blinking. Every batch ran like it used to when someone gave a damn. Assessments landed exactly on time, some early. Reserve accounts aligned. Vendors paid. City inspectors happy. It was like watching an orchestra hit every note after weeks of static and coughing. I didn't touch the dashboard much. I just watched. Coffee in hand, slippers on, mutt curled at my feet. The fan on my desktop whirred low, steady as the final log from the assessment cycle hit green and cleared. No flags. No fallbacks triggered. Just smooth, calculated performance. The system had taken a beating. Logic stripped, workflows choked, redundancies deleted by people who thought covenants were aesthetic. But healed. Bit by bit. Line by line. It remembered what it was built for. Stability, integrity, quiet strength that didn't need branding. At 6:02 a.m., the assessment dashboard auto-refreshed. In the top right corner, just above the admin panel, a new user tag blinked into view. Hail, contractor. It felt like putting my name on something I'd written long ago, but never signed. Not pride. Not ego. Just a subtle reminder. This was mine. It always had been. A few minutes later, my signal thread lit up. Deposits hit. Vendors happy. City inspector gave thumbs up. We're breathing again. I replied to none of them. It didn't need me to. From what I heard, the attorney was standing outside the boardroom that morning when the logs came through. He didn't say much, just looked at the compliance screen, then turned to the remaining board members and whispered the quietest line in the building. We're not firing him again. Ever. That was enough. No parade. No community-wide email. No Facebook applause or fake humility posts. Just silence and results. They used to call it legacy code. Now, they just call it essential. And somewhere in her McMansion, Karen Whitaker is probably still refreshing the resident app, wondering why the glowing all systems green never quite feels the same. Meanwhile, I sit on my porch, coffee in hand, watching the lawn stay perfectly mowed, the pool sparkling, the American flags flying at exactly the approved height because the man they tried to erase never really left. He just waited. And when the rules finally collapsed under their own weight, he was the only one who knew how to put them back together. The neighborhood is quiet again. Peaceful. Perfect. But everyone knows now, behind every smiling Karen smile, behind every modernization promise, there's a quiet guy with a laptop who remembers. And next time they decide to fire the only person keeping the machine alive, well, they'll notice. They always do.